300,000 years. That's how long Neanderthals survived in Ice Age Europe. They endured winters that would overwhelm most modern humans in days. They hunted giant animals, mastered fire, crafted stone tools with remarkable precision, and they cared for their sick and injured, people who could no longer hunt, who could no longer walk, yet were never abandoned. Then, around 40,000 years ago, they were gone. No mass grave, no final battlefield, no last stand preserved in the earth, just silence. Where an entire human population had once lived. For decades, the explanation seemed simple. Modern humans arrived. Neanderthals lost. Case closed. But science rarely stays that simple. Every new fossil, every new genome, every new discovery has made that familiar story harder to defend. Because the evidence no longer points to a single ending. It points to a mystery. One with no single villain. No single catastrophe. And perhaps, no true extinction at all. Because if the Neanderthals really disappeared, why are parts of them still alive today? To answer that question, we first have to uncover the biggest misconception ever told about them. Picture the Neanderthal you've seen in old books. Hunched, grunting, dragging a club, barely human. That image wasn't based on the full evidence. It was based on an outdated idea. For decades, discoveries have painted a very different picture. Real Neanderthals were powerfully built for the Ice Age. Their bones reveal extraordinary strength. They crafted sophisticated stone tools with remarkable precision. They controlled fire. They planned dangerous hunts. And they worked together to bring down enormous animals. But one discovery changed everything. Several Neanderthal fossils show severe injuries, broken bones, crushed limbs, trauma that should have made surviving alone almost impossible. Yet many of those individuals lived for years afterward. That means someone stayed. Someone shared food. Someone offered protection. Someone cared. That's not the behavior of a mindless brute. That's compassion. That's cooperation. That's a society. The more scientists learned, the harder it became to believe Neanderthals were somehow less human. So if they were intelligent, skilled, and capable of caring for one another, why didn't they survive? The answer may have begun long before Homo sapiens ever arrived. It may have started with a world that was already beginning to change. Before we blame Homo sapiens, we need to look at the world Neanderthals already lived in, because it wasn't stable. It was changing. Again. And again. Ice sheets advanced. Then retreated. Grasslands became forests. Forests gave way to open plains. The animals Neanderthals depended on kept shifting their ranges. Entire hunting grounds disappeared. New ones appeared hundreds of kilometers away. And Neanderthals had no choice. They followed. But there was another problem. Neanderthals didn't live in vast populations. Most groups were small, often just a few dozen people, separated by mountains, rivers, and enormous distances. That made every loss matter. One harsh winter, one unsuccessful hunting season, one disease spreading through a single group. Any one of those could push a small population closer to the edge. Not because Neanderthals were failing, but because small populations are naturally more vulnerable to chance. And over thousands of years, those losses begin to add up. This is something evolution has shown again and again. A species doesn't always disappear because it's weaker. Sometimes, it simply becomes too rare. By the time another human population entered Europe, many Neanderthal groups may already have been undergoing pressure, which means the biggest turning point in their story may not have been the arrival of Homo sapiens. It may have been what happened when two human populations finally met. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals called Europe and Western Asia home. Meanwhile, a different human population was evolving in Africa, Homo sapiens. Then, beginning around 70,000 years ago, some of those populations expanded into Eurasia. Eventually, their paths crossed. For a long time, scientists imagined this meeting as a simple story. One species arrived. The other disappeared. But the evidence tells a far more complicated story. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens weren't strangers from different worlds. They shared a common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years earlier. They looked different. They lived somewhat differently. But biologically, they were remarkably close. Archaeological evidence shows that in some regions, the two populations overlapped for thousands of years. They explored the same valleys, hunted many of the same animals, and lived on the same changing landscape. Then came the discovery that transformed the entire debate. Ancient DNA revealed that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had children together. Not once. Not by accident. But often enough to leave a genetic legacy that still exists today. That single discovery forced scientists to ask a completely different question. If Neanderthals became part of our ancestry, did they really disappear? Or have we been thinking about extinction in the wrong way all along? Because the next piece of evidence isn't hidden in an ancient cave. It's hidden inside millions of people alive today. What if the strongest evidence about Neanderthals wasn't buried underground? What if you've been carrying it your entire life? If your ancestry traces primarily outside Africa, you likely carry Neanderthal DNA today, usually between 1 and 2% of your genome, a tiny fraction, yet scientifically undeniable. These aren't random genetic fragments. Some Neanderthal genes still influence traits linked to immunity, skin, hair, and other biological functions, although their effects vary from person to person. How did they get there? A major genetic study published in 2024 suggests that the main period of interbreeding happened between roughly 50,500 and 43,500 years ago. Not during a single encounter, but across thousands of years, generation after generation. That changes the entire story, because the old idea was simple. Modern humans arrived. Neanderthals disappeared. But the evidence points somewhere else. Some Neanderthal populations didn't simply vanish. They gradually became part of expanding Homo sapiens communities. Their distinctive culture slowly faded. Their stone tool traditions disappeared. Their camps were eventually abandoned. But part of their biological legacy continued. Still living. Still evolving. Inside us. And if Neanderthals became part of our story, then perhaps the real question was never, why did they disappear? Perhaps it's this. Why did Homo sapiens continue to grow, while Neanderthal populations steadily declined? If Neanderthals were strong, skilled, and intelligent, then why did Homo sapiens continue to spread? One leading idea has nothing to do with being smarter. It may have come down to something far less obvious. Connection. Evidence suggests Homo sapiens often lived in larger, more widespread social networks. Groups that exchanged food, shared tools, passed on new ideas, and supported one another across long distances. When one community struggled, another might help. Neanderthal groups, by contrast, were often smaller, more isolated, more dependent on the success of a single hunting season. That doesn't mean they were less capable. Far from it. They had already survived in Europe for over 300,000 years. They understood the landscape, mastered fire, hunted some of the most dangerous animals of the Ice Age. But imagine two equally skilled populations facing the same brutal winter. One stands alone. The other is connected to dozens of neighboring groups. If food disappears, if disease spreads, if a hunt fails, which population has the better chance of recovering? Not because it's stronger, not because it's more intelligent, but because it has more people to rely on. That isn't a dramatic conquest. It's a demographic advantage, one that grows almost invisibly, generation after generation. But even that may not be enough to explain the mystery, because there was another force, one that neither Neanderthals nor Homo sapiens could control. The planet itself was changing. What if neither species was the real enemy? What if the planet was? The world Neanderthals lived in wasn't one long, frozen ice age. It was a landscape in constant motion. Temperatures rose, then fell, sometimes within just a few generations. Grasslands became forests. Forests gave way to open plains. Rivers changed course. Water sources disappeared. The animals Neanderthals depended on kept moving, and every shift forced people to adapt. Again and again. Neanderthals had done it before. For hundreds of thousands of years, they survived repeated glacial cycles. They were among the most resilient humans to ever live. But resilience has limits, especially when populations are already small and scattered. Climate alone may not have caused their disappearance, but it almost certainly increased the pressure. Less food, fewer people, more isolation, generation after generation, until survival itself became harder. Yet one mystery remained. If climate changed for everyone, why did Homo sapiens continue to expand, while Neanderthal populations kept shrinking? For years, many scientists believed they already had the answer. They thought the evidence wasn't hidden in the climate. For years, one explanation dominated the conversation. Inbreeding. The logic seemed convincing. Small, isolated populations have fewer opportunities to exchange genes with other groups. Over many generations, that can increase the chances of harmful inherited variants becoming more common. For a long time, many researchers believed this was the missing piece. Perhaps Neanderthals simply became too genetically isolated to recover. It was a neat explanation. But science has a habit of challenging neat explanations. A 2026 study analyzing more than 24 Neanderthal genomes painted a more complex picture. Some of the last known Neanderthal populations appeared to be more genetically connected than scientists had once assumed. They also showed fewer signs of harmful inherited variants than many researchers expected. That doesn't mean inbreeding played no role. It almost certainly affected some small populations. But it no longer appears to explain the entire disappearance. Instead, the evidence points to multiple pressures acting together. A changing climate, small populations, isolation, competition for resources, and interbreeding with Homo sapiens. Each added another layer of pressure. Each pushed some populations a little closer to the edge. Not everywhere, not all at once, but over thousands of years. And once you see the evidence that way, one thing becomes remarkably clear. There was never a single moment when the Neanderthals disappeared. There was only a long goodbye, one that unfolded so slowly, no one living through it would have known it was the end. So, what did the end actually look like? Probably nothing like the movies. There was no final battle. No last Neanderthal standing alone against an army of Homo sapiens. No single day when one human population defeated another. The evidence simply doesn't support that story. Instead, the ending unfolded differently across thousands of kilometers. Some Neanderthal communities likely disappeared after their numbers became too small to recover. Others followed migrating herds into unfamiliar landscapes, searching for food in a world that refused to stay the same. Some joined neighboring Neanderthal groups, buying themselves another generation. And some had children with Homo sapiens, quietly weaving their genes into the future of our own species. Over time, their distinctive stone tool traditions disappeared. Their camps fell silent. Their culture slowly faded from the archaeological record. But something extraordinary remained. Not monuments, not written records, not cities. Their DNA, still carried by millions of people today. Which means the real mystery was never how the Neanderthals died. It was how we define the word extinction. Can a human population disappear as a distinct culture, yet continue through its descendants? The evidence increasingly suggests yes. And once you accept that, the final answer becomes impossible to ignore. Perhaps the Neanderthals didn't lose their place in human history. Perhaps they became part of it, though. Why did the Neanderthals really disappear? After decades of research, the evidence points to no single answer. No final battle. No single catastrophe. No one villain. Instead, a changing climate. Small, isolated populations. The advantages of larger Homo sapiens social networks. Competition for resources. And generations of interbreeding. Together, they reshaped the human story. The old story claimed that Homo sapiens replaced the Neanderthals. But the evidence tells a far more remarkable story. We met them. We lived beside them. We competed with them. We had children with them. And today, millions of us still carry part of their genetic legacy. So the next time you see a DNA ancestry result showing Neanderthal ancestry, remember what you're really looking at. Not a monster, not a failed species, but another kind of human. Resilient, intelligent, compassionate. A people who survived Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, and left a part of themselves behind. Which brings us back to where we began. 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals disappeared. Or so we thought. Because if part of them still lives inside us, if their DNA still walks the earth, if their story helped shape our own, then perhaps the greatest misconception wasn't how the Neanderthals disappeared. It was believing they ever truly did.